You should start packing before the weekend. My mother said it 9 days after we buried my grandfather, standing in his kitchen with her leather purse still hooked over one arm, like she had only stopped by between errands. 3 real estate brochures lay on the table where Grandpa Earl used to sort seed catalogs and birthday cards. My father was outside by the barn, taking pictures with his phone. My younger sister, Tessa, was on the porch measuring the front windows because Mom said the house would show better with lighter curtains. And me, I was standing by the stove in the only home I had ever truly belonged to, holding a coffee mug I had not taken a single sip from. My name is Clara Whitcomb. I'm 31 years old. When I was 6, my parents left me at Grandpa Earl's farmhouse with a red backpack, a box of broken Crayola crayons, and a promise that my mother would write as soon as they got settled. She never did. For 25 years, that house raised me more than either of my parents ever tried to. The porch taught me how to wait, the kitchen taught me how to survive. And the blue mailbox at the end of the drive taught me that silence can arrive every day and still feel new. Now they were back, not because they missed me, not because grief had softened them, not because Grandpa's death reminded them of family. They were back because the farmhouse had land, a barn, and a market value. My mother tapped one glossy brochure with her fingernail. "This isn't emotional, Clara," she said. "It's estate management." I didn't answer. I only looked past her shoulder, toward the closed study door, where Grandpa's old brown leather mail satchel still hung on the brass hook. Because 6 weeks before he died, he had given me one final instruction. "The day they call this house an asset," he said, "you deliver what I couldn't." Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet your phone battery is at 32% right now, right? If that's true, type 1. If not, type 2. Let's see whether I got it right. Alright, enough talking. Let's begin the story. I kept staring at that satchel instead of my mother, because looking directly at her still did something humiliating to me. I was 31 years old. I paid my own bills. I had sat beside dying strangers at 3 in the morning and known, by the change in their breathing, when to call their families. I had learned how to be calm in rooms where everyone else was falling apart. And still, one sentence from Marjorie Whitcomb could reach into my chest and find the 6-year-old girl who once believed her mother would write. My father came back through the mudroom, wiping his shoes too carefully on Grandpa's mat. Russell Whitcomb had spent 30 years adjusting insurance claims, and he still looked at every room like he was deciding what damage counted and what could be denied. He glanced once at the closed study door, then at me. "Where are the property documents?" he asked. Not "How are you holding up?" Not "I'm sorry, Earl is gone." Not even "Clara, you look tired." Documents. That was the first thing my father wanted from me, after 25 years of absence. Dawn Ellery, the realtor my mother had brought, stood near the hallway pretending to admire the trim. Her pen had stopped moving. Tessa was still on the porch with the measuring tape. But when Dad said documents, I saw her pause through the window. Just for a second. Then she looked down at the tape like it had given her an answer she did not want. My mother noticed none of it. She slid one glossy brochure closer to me, showing a farmhouse that looked nothing like Grandpa's, all white paint and perfect shutters, and no grief in the walls. "This place has potential," Mom said. "But potential only matters if we move quickly." She spoke like she was already walking buyers through the kitchen, already explaining away the cracked pantry door, the porch rail Grandpa meant to fix in spring, the pencil marks inside the doorway, where he measured me every April 4th. This house smelled like old paper, cinnamon, lemon oil, and the apple hand pies he baked on Sundays, because I liked the crimped edges. She had managed to reduce all of it to a listing strategy before the coffee even cooled. Grandpa's voice came back to me then, thin from illness but steady in the way it got when he was giving directions. "Don't open it when I die," he had said, one hand resting on the cracked leather satchel. "Grief makes people reach too early. Don't open it when they cry. Tears are easy. Don't open it when they lie. Lies are easier. Wait until your mother calls this house an asset." I had asked what was inside. He looked toward the blue mailbox at the end of the drive and said, "Delivery instructions." "Clara, are you listening?" my mother asked. Her voice had that polished patience people use when they have already decided you are being difficult. I turned from the study door. "Yes," I said. "I heard you." She gave me a small, relieved smile, mistaking silence for surrender. Under my blouse, the key Grandpa had pressed into my palm 3 days before he stopped getting out of bed, rested warm against my skin. My parents thought the house was the question. They did not know Grandpa had left the answer hanging behind a locked study door. To understand why that locked study door mattered, you have to go back to April of 2000, to a red backpack sitting on Grandpa Earl's porch, and a mother who kept looking at the road instead of at her child. I was 6 years old. The backpack had strawberries on the front pocket, and one zipper caught if you pulled it too fast. Inside were 3 shirts, 2 pairs of shorts, a nightgown with faded moons, and a box of Crayola crayons missing the yellow one. Mom told me I was staying with Grandpa for a little while. "Just until we get settled," she said, smoothing my hair with 2 fingers. Not a full touch, more like she was fixing something out of place. Dad carried the backpack from the car and set it beside the porch steps. He did not come inside. Tessa was 3 then, asleep in the back seat with a stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Before Mom closed the car door, she leaned in and kissed Tessa's forehead. I remember that clearly, because I waited for mine. It came, but barely. A quick press near my hairline. Then Mom smiled too brightly and said, "I'll write you first thing, sweetheart. You be good for Grandpa." I nodded because good was the only thing I knew how to be when adults sounded tired. Grandpa stood behind me, one hand wrapped around his coffee mug, his mailman's cap low over his eyes. He did not interrupt. He did not make promises for people who were already leaving. Their car backed down the drive. I lifted my hand and waved until my arm hurt. At the end of the road, there was a stop sign. I thought they would pause there, maybe look back, maybe roll down a window. They didn't. The brake lights flashed once, then disappeared behind the maple trees like the road had swallowed them whole. Grandpa did not take me inside right away. He stood beside me at the mailbox until the dust settled, as if giving my parents one last chance to turn around. I asked him, "When will the first letter come?" He looked toward the blue mailbox leaning at the edge of the gravel. "Mail takes time, sweetheart," he said. So I waited. That first week, I checked the mailbox every afternoon. By the second week, I learned the difference between Grandpa's old truck and every other engine on the road. By the end of summer, my backpack still sat by the hall closet because I thought packed things were easier to take home. September came. School started. Leaves browned along the fence line. No letter came. A child does not know she has been abandoned on the day it happens. She only knows someone promised to come back, so she keeps looking at the road. By Christmas, I had stopped asking when they were coming back. Grandpa had not stopped watching the mailbox. The first letter I sent came back the following April, and his hands shook when he saw the red stamp. That returned letter had started 17 days earlier at Grandpa's kitchen table. I was 7, old enough to write in sentences if nobody cared about spelling, and old enough to understand that waiting did not make the mailbox open by itself. Grandpa Earl found me pressing my pencil so hard the point kept snapping. I had written "Dear Mom" at the top and nothing else. He stood behind my chair for a while, then set his big hand beside the paper, not on mine. "Letters don't have to be fancy," he said. "They just have to be true." So I told the truth the way a 7-year-old tells it. I wrote that Grandpa had made pancakes shaped like stars. I wrote that the red backpack was still in the hall closet. I wrote that I had a loose tooth and missed the way Mom smelled when she got dressed for church. I asked if Tessa still had the stuffed rabbit. At the bottom, I drew the blue mailbox with 3 stick people beside it. I put myself in the middle because I did not yet know where else to stand. Grandpa showed me how to fold the paper into thirds, where the stamp went, and how to press it flat so the corner would not peel. He did not correct my crooked address. He only turned the envelope once and said, "A letter is a small brave thing, Clara. You send it out without knowing what hands will hold it. Then we walked to the end of the drive together, and I lifted the red flag on the mailbox like I was raising a signal someone was supposed to see. For 17 days, I checked before breakfast and after school. On the 18th day, the envelope came back bent at one corner, dirt smudged along the bottom edge, my own handwriting staring at me from the front. Across it, in red ink, were 3 words I could read, because Grandpa had taught me: return to sender. I thought it meant I had done something wrong. Wrong stamp, wrong lines. Wrong daughter. Grandpa picked up the envelope, and anger crossed his face so quickly I almost missed it. Then he slid it into his coat pocket like it was something sharp. It came back, he said. Does that mean she didn't get it? He looked at the road, then at the mailbox, then at me. It means it came back. That was all. Not a lie. Not the whole truth either. At 7, I only understood that the letter had failed, so the next year I tried harder. At 8, I used my best handwriting and told Dad I could ride a bike without training wheels. At 10, I mailed my school picture, the one where my bangs were crooked because Grandpa had trimmed them himself. At 12, I wrote that I made honor roll. At 15, I wrote only 3 sentences, because by then hope had learned to make itself smaller. Every April, Grandpa walked with me to the mailbox. Every May, something came back. Sometimes the stamp said, forwarding expired. Sometimes it said, unable to deliver. Once, when I was 16, it said refused, and I stared at that word until the letters stopped looking like English. Refused was different from lost. Refused meant the door had opened long enough for someone to close it. Grandpa never told me to stop. He never told me to keep going either. He just kept the envelopes. I thought he saved them because I couldn't bear to throw them away. I didn't know he was making a record. I didn't know that some years, after I went to bed, he sent copies by certified mail to my father. I didn't know Russell Whitcomb signed his name to proof that my words had reached him, then still never sent one back. By 24, my letters had changed. I wrote, I work nights now, sitting with people near the end. I wonder if that would matter to you. That envelope came back too. Grandpa held it longer than the others, his thumb resting over the red mark like he could rub it away. A returned letter tells the truth twice, he said quietly. Once about the sender, once about the person who would not receive it. I thought he was comforting me. I didn't know he was naming evidence. The year I found the church newsletter, I was 17 and working 3 afternoons a week at the public library in Mill Haven. Mrs. Mabel Hargrove, who had retired from that same library, but still came in to correct the way people shelved biographies, asked me to help sort old donation boxes before the Christmas book sale. Most of it was harmless. Cookbooks with cracked spines, church directories, vacation guides from years nobody wanted back. Then I opened a cardboard box, labeled Florida Ministries, probably from some snowbird's estate donation, and saw my last name printed under a photograph. The picture was small, glossy, and bright in a way that felt almost rude. Marjorie and Russell Whitcomb stood on either side of Tessa in front of a church Christmas tree. Tessa wore a red velvet dress and held a candle with both hands. My mother had one arm around her shoulders. My father's smile looked easy. Underneath the photo, the caption said, "The Whitcombs are grateful for another year of family blessings." I read it once, then again. Then I looked at the date, December 2011. I was in Pennsylvania that year, wearing a borrowed choir robe and scanning the back row for people who were not coming. I took the newsletter to the computer desk and typed my mother's name into Facebook. I told myself I only wanted to know if she was alive. That was a lie. But it was a gentle one, and at 17 I still allowed myself those. Her profile came up immediately. Public. Of course it was public. People who are proud of their lives usually leave the curtains open. There were beach pictures from Myrtle Beach, Tessa's first day of middle school, pumpkin patch, Saturdays, matching Christmas pajamas, my father grilling under string lights, my mother holding up pies she had not taught me how to make. I scrolled for almost an hour. Not because I wanted to, because I kept thinking the next photo would explain me, Maybe I would be mentioned in a caption. Maybe there would be one old picture, one sentence, one careful little lie like our older daughter couldn't be with us this year. There was nothing. No Clara. No missing child-shaped space. No room left in the story for a girl standing beside a blue mailbox 3 states away. They had documented every ordinary thing I had spent my childhood begging to be part of. The thing I remember most is that I did not cry in the library. I printed one photograph for 25 cents, folded it once, and put it in the pocket of my work apron. Then I finished sorting the donation box. Mrs. Hargrove watched me over the top of her glasses but did not ask. That was her kindness. Some adults demand your pain because they want to feel helpful. Mabel only slid a stack of returned books closer to me and said, "Alphabetical by author, honey. Keeps the hands busy." When I got home, Grandpa was in the kitchen rolling dough for apple hand pies. Flour dusted his forearms. The radio was playing low, some old country station that came in clearer after sunset. He had cut the apples too thin, the way I liked them, and there was one extra circle of dough waiting at the edge of the table. I almost pulled the picture from my pocket right then. I almost asked him if he knew they had Christmas trees and candlelight and matching pajamas. I almost asked whether Tessa knew my name. But Grandpa looked tired that night, older than he had that morning. So I washed my hands, stood beside him, and pressed the fork marks into the edges of the pies. The photograph stayed folded in my pocket until the paper softened from the heat of my body. At dinner, he asked if the library was busy. I said yes. He asked if Mrs. Hargrove was still bossing people around. I said yes. He smiled. I did not ask the question. He did not force me to. Later, after I went upstairs, I heard the study door close. Not all at once. Slowly, like a man trying not to make a sound in his own house. The lock turned. The floorboards creaked once behind it. Then came the faint scrape of the desk drawer, and silence. I stood at the top of the stairs with the folded photograph in my hand and understood something without having the words for it yet. I had found their version of the truth that day. Grandpa was sitting downstairs with the paper trail they had tried to bury. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet you're watching this video right now while lying down with your legs crossed, right? If that's true, type 3. If not, type 4. Let's see whether I got it right. Alright, enough talking. Let's begin the story. After that night, I noticed the study differently. Before, it had simply been Grandpa's room with the heavy desk, the wall calendar from the post office, and the old rotary phone he refused to throw away because, as he put it, a thing that still works has earned its place. But after the photograph, the room felt less like a room and more like a sealed envelope. The door stayed open most days. I could walk past and see his route maps pinned to corkboard, his rubber date stamp beside a dry ink pad, the leather satchel hanging from the brass hook behind the door. Once a year, though, usually a few days after my birthday, that door closed. The first time I recognized the pattern, I was 13. I had not told Grandpa I mailed anything that year, because I was old enough to be embarrassed by hope. Still, 3 days later, after supper, he washed his plate, dried his hands on the towel, and went into the study. The lock clicked. Not loud, just final. I stood in the hallway with my math book pressed to my chest and heard him dial the rotary phone, each number turning slowly back into place. His voice changed when my father answered. Grandpa Earl was gentle with me, careful with neighbors, polite with strangers. But through that door, his voice had iron in it. "Russell," he said, "I am holding her letter in my hand. Don't tell me you forgot the date." Then silence. Long enough for the refrigerator to hum twice. Then Grandpa said, lower, "No. You don't get to call this settled." I moved away before I heard more, because children raised by quiet people learn early that some pain has a door for a reason. The next morning, the study was open again. Grandpa was at the stove, frying eggs, like nothing had happened. His eyes were red. When I asked if he was sick, he said, "Dust in the files." I looked past him toward the study. The satchel hung exactly where it always did, buckled shut, patient as a waiting animal. I did not ask about it. Not then. I think part of me understood that if I asked the right question, my life might divide into before and after. I was not ready for after. Mrs. Hargrove knew more than she ever said. One evening when I was 19, I found her standing near our mailbox with a covered dish in both hands, watching Grandpa inside the study window. The lamp was on. His head was bent over the desk. "Your grandfather was a fine mailman," she said. "Never left a thing undelivered if he could help it." Then she looked at the blue mailbox and added, almost to herself, "But some folks can be standing at the address and still refuse what's theirs." She handed me the dish and walked home before I could answer. Years later, I would learn what he was doing behind that locked door. He was copying dates, saving envelopes, writing down calls, sending certified letters my father had to sign for, building a record one April at a time. But back then, I only knew this. Every year, after my birthday, Grandpa Earl carried something into that study that came back heavier than paper. And every year, when he came out, he looked at me like a man still trying to deliver a message to people, determined not to receive it. By July of 2025, Grandpa Earl had started sitting down before he admitted he was tired. That was how I knew. Men like him did not announce weakness. They negotiated with it in private. He would pause halfway between the stove and the table, one hand on the chair back, pretending to study the weather through the kitchen window. Then he would say something about rain coming, even when the sky was clean and blue. I had spent enough nights beside hospice beds to recognize a body quietly changing its terms. Dr. Naomi Feld gave us the words in a small examination room that smelled like hand sanitizer and old magazines. Congestive heart failure, advanced. A shadow in the lung that had no business being there. More tests if he wanted them. More treatment, if he chose it. Grandpa listened with his cap in both hands and thanked her like she had handed him a weather report. In the truck afterward, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles hurt. He looked out the window at the passing cornfields and said, "I delivered mail through 3 blizzards and 2 floods, Clara. I'm not dying under fluorescent lights if I can help it." So we brought him home. I cut my shifts back and learned the strange cruelty of using my training on the person who had raised me. I knew how to chart medication. I knew how to listen for fluid in the lungs. I knew how to change sheets without jostling sore bones. None of that told me what to do when he apologized for needing help with his socks. At night, after I checked his oxygen tubing, I baked apple hand pies for June Abernathy's diner because grief left too much room inside my hands. In September, he called me into the study. The leather satchel lay on the desk, unbuckled but not open. Beside it sat a sealed envelope with Tessa's name on it, a folder labeled Graham Bellamy, and a small brass key. Grandpa's fingers rested on the satchel flap. "3 things," he said, and his voice had the old route, master firmness in it. "Don't open this when I die. Grief is not the right time. Don't open it when they cry. Tears don't prove delivery, and don't open it when they lie. Lies are light, they travel easy." I sat across from him, unable to look away from Tessa's name. He saw me see it. Of course he did. "The day your mother stands in my kitchen and calls this house an asset," he said, "you open this satchel right there. Not in private. Not later when your hands stop shaking. Right there. And you make sure Tessa sees what's inside." My throat tightened around her name. "How do you know she'll come?" Grandpa looked toward the mailbox, then back at me. "People who want property bring witnesses they think are on their side." I asked him why he had never told me everything. It came out smaller than I meant it to, almost childish, and I hated that. Grandpa closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were wet but steady. "Because you were a child waiting for a mother," he said. "I was not going to be the man who made you stop." 6 weeks later, he died in his own bed, in the house he had kept warm for me. I thought the worst thing he left behind was silence. I was wrong. He left instructions. He died before sunrise on the 18th of October 2025, with the bedroom window cracked open because he said houses needed to breathe too. The blue mailbox was visible from his bed, if you knew where to look, leaning at the end of the drive like an old soldier refusing to quit his post. I had checked his oxygen at 3:10. At 4:26, his breathing changed. At 4:31, the room became too quiet. I sat beside him with one hand on his wrist long after there was nothing left to count. The funeral was 6 days later at Street Marks, the little brick church where Grandpa had delivered Christmas cards to half the congregation for 40 years. People came with covered dishes, folded handkerchiefs, and stories about storm mornings when Earl Whitcomb had put mail in their boxes before the plows came through. Mrs. Hargrove sat in the second row and did not sing. June Abernathy cried into a napkin from her own diner. Caleb Rusk stood near the back wall in his only suit, looking uncomfortable and loyal. My parents arrived 9 minutes before the service started. I know because I was staring at the clock above the vestibule door, doing the kind of counting grief makes you do when it has nowhere else to go. My mother wore black wool, pearl earrings, and the expression of a woman prepared to be seen suffering. My father shook hands before he reached me. Dad was a complicated man, he told Pastor Glenn, soft enough to sound respectful, loud enough to be heard. But family is family. The words landed in my stomach like cold food. Tessa came in behind them. She was 28 then, taller than I expected, with our father's chin and our mother's careful posture. She looked at me like she had been warned about me, but not enough. Her hands kept folding and unfolding around the strap of her purse. For 1 second, I wondered what story they had given her for my absence. Then my mother crossed the vestibule, opened her arms, and hugged me for the first time since I was 6 years old. Everyone in the hallway saw it. That was the point. Her coat smelled like expensive perfume and winter air. Her cheek touched mine without warmth. To anyone watching, she was a grieving daughter-in-law comforting her orphaned child. But her mouth moved close to my ear, and in a voice soft enough for only me, she said, "We should discuss the property before things get messy." Then she pulled back, squeezed my shoulders for the audience, and dabbed under one eye with a folded tissue. I stood very still. Grandpa was not even in the ground yet, and she had already found the listing price. At the reception, my father performed grief like he had rented it by the hour. He told 2 men near the coffee urn that Grandpa had loved fishing, which made Mrs. Hargrove look up from her paper plate. "Earl got seasick on a paddle boat at the county fair," she said flatly. My father laughed too hard, as if she had offered him a joke instead of a correction. Later, I found him in the hallway outside the study, photographing the locked door with his phone. He lowered it when he saw me and said, "Just documenting the condition of the house." Tessa found me in the kitchen while people were scraping casserole dishes clean. She stood near the stove, not quite entering the room. "Did he really make apple hand pies every Sunday?" she asked. The question was so unexpected I forgot how to answer. "Who told you that?" I said. Her eyes flicked toward the front window, where my mother was already calling her name. Tessa's face closed like a book someone had touched too quickly. "I just heard it somewhere," she said, and left before I could ask where somewhere was. 2 days later, my phone rang with my mother's name on the screen. I stared at it until the second ring, because part of me still remembered being 7, waiting for that name to come toward me instead of away. When I answered, she did not ask if I had eaten or slept. She said Thursday at 10 would work best for the realtor. "We need to start sorting your grandfather's things," she added. "And Clara, please try not to turn this into something emotional." Her first real call in 25 years was not for me, it was for the house. I did not argue with her on the phone. That surprised her. I could hear it in the small pause after I said Thursday was fine. My mother had prepared for resistance, maybe tears, maybe a scene she could later describe to Tessa as proof that I was unstable. Silence gave her nothing to hold. Grandpa had told me not to open the satchel early, and for the first time since he died, following instructions felt like something solid under my feet. The next morning, I drove to Graham Bellamy's office over the hardware store on King Street. He was younger than I expected for a man Grandpa trusted with his final business. Mid-40s, silver already threading his beard, sleeves rolled like he had been working before I arrived, and would keep working after I left. He did not offer me sympathy in that syrupy way people do when they want grief to move faster. He only said, "Your grandfather was very clear, Clara. The house was settled before he passed." He slid a folder across the desk. Living Trust. The 14th of August, 2025. The farmhouse, the barn, the 1.7 acres, all transferred cleanly. I was trustee and primary beneficiary. Marjorie and Russell Whitcomb had no authority to list, sell, divide, borrow against, or enter into contract over the property. I read the words twice, because legal language has a way of sounding unreal when it is protecting you. "Why didn't he just tell me?" I asked. Graham's mouth moved. "Back home." I stood in the study for a long time without turning on the lamp. Afternoon light laid itself across the desk, the route maps, the dead rotary phone, the satchel behind the door. The brass key was warm in my hand. I wanted to open it so badly my fingers ached. I built every argument for disobeying him. What if it was nothing? What if I opened it tomorrow in front of them and found only old postcards, rubber bands, a dead man's habit mistaken for a plan? What if they laughed? Caleb came by near dusk to fix the oven door that no longer closed unless you lifted it with your knee. He found me sitting at the kitchen table with the key beside my coffee cup. He tightened the hinge, washed his hands, and did not ask to see what I was hiding. That was why I trusted him. "You don't have to be brave every minute," he said. I looked toward the study. "I'm not being brave," I told him. "I'm following instructions." Wednesday night, I baked apple hand pies for June's diner, and ruined the first batch. Too much cinnamon. Edges sealed wrong. Grandpa would have tapped the counter twice, and made me start over. So I did. I washed the bowl, peeled more apples, and tried again with my hands shaking less. By the time the second batch cooled, the house smelled almost like it used to. Almost is the cruelest word after someone dies. Before bed, I stood in the study doorway and looked at the satchel one more time. Right address, right hands, right day. I could hear Grandpa's voice in the walls more than in memory. Thursday morning was coming with my mother, my father, a realtor, and whatever story they thought they could still sell. By then, the satchel felt less like a bag, and more like a room full of people holding their breath. Thursday arrived with a clean blue sky, which felt almost insulting. Bad things should come with weather. Rain. Wind. Something with the decency to warn you. Instead, sunlight spread across Grandpa's kitchen table like it had every morning of my life, catching on the flower I had missed near the baseboard and the tiny scratch marks his coffee mug had made over the years. At Noah, Cinci shapte. Gravel cracked under tires. 2 cars. One confident engine, one cautious one. I did not go to the window. I stood by the stove and let them come to the door. My mother entered first, of course. Marjorie Whitcomb did not knock. She stepped into the mudroom carrying a folder, a purse, and the kind of energy that made a house brace itself. "Good," she said, glancing around. "You're dressed." Behind her came Russell, already looking past me toward the hallway. Dawn Ellery followed with her clipboard pressed to her chest, apology written all over her face. Tessa came last. She looked at the floor when she crossed the threshold, then at me, then quickly away, as if the house had more truth in it than she was ready to meet. Mom walked straight to the kitchen curtains and pulled them open. "This room needs light," she said. "Buyers hate dark kitchens." The word buyers landed on Grandpa's table before anyone sat down. Russell opened the hall closet, then shut it when he found coats instead of documents. "Where are the tax records?" he asked. "And the deed? We need to know what we're dealing with." I poured coffee because my hands needed a job. "Do you take sugar?" I asked him. He blinked. For 1 second, my father had to face the fact that his daughter did not know how he took his coffee, and he did not know how she took pain. Black, he said. I handed him the mug. He took it without thanking me. Dawn Ellery cleared her throat softly. Maybe we should slow down until ownership is confirmed. My mother gave her a look that made the woman's pen freeze halfway above the clipboard. Ownership is not the issue, Mom said. This is family property. Tessa shifted near the pantry door. Her eyes moved to the pencil marks inside the frame, the ones Grandpa had made every birthday, until I stopped growing. She read them from the bottom up. 6, 7, 8, 9, a childhood climbing wood in plain sight. Then Mom sat at the table and opened her folder. She had sticky notes on everything: comparable sales, winter market trends, estimated repairs, a printed page about curb appeal. She spoke for nearly 5 minutes without once saying Grandpa's name. The roof was aging, the barn needed work, the land was underused. The longer we waited, the more value we risked losing. Finally, she folded her hands and gave me that practiced, patient smile. Clara, I know you're attached, but we have to be realistic. This house is an asset now. The word did not echo. It didn't need to. It simply arrived, exactly addressed. I set the coffee pot down. That's the word, I said. Mom frowned. What word? I reached under my collar and pulled out the brass key. Russell's eyes dropped to it. His whole face changed, not with fear yet, but calculation. What is that for? He asked. I walked past him into the hallway. No one spoke as I unlocked the study. The door opened with a tired wooden sigh, and the smell of paper, dust, old leather, and Grandpa's pipe tobacco came out like a memory that had been waiting with its hand on the knob. The satchel hung behind the door. Brown leather, cracked at the flap, brass buckle dulled from 40 years of weather and work. I lifted it off the hook with both hands. When I turned around, they were all in the hallway. My mother looked annoyed. My father looked relieved when he saw what I was holding. Dad's old mailbag? He said, almost laughing. Clara, what exactly do you think that proves? Tessa did not laugh. Her eyes were fixed on the satchel, like some part of her recognized that this was not an object. It was a delivery. I carried it to the kitchen table and set it down where my mother's sales folder had been. Dawn Ellery slowly lowered her clipboard. Outside, a shadow crossed the porch window. Mrs. Hargrove, casserole dish in hand, had stopped at the screen door. Nobody invited her in. Nobody told her to leave. I touched the brass buckle, and for the first time that morning, my father stopped smiling. The buckle opened with a small metal click, the kind of sound that should not have been loud enough to change a room. Inside the satchel were bundles of envelopes tied with cotton string, each bundle marked in Grandpa's square handwriting: 2001, 2004, 2008, 2013, 2024. My mother's face tightened. What is this supposed to be? She asked, but her voice had lost its polish. I took out the first envelope. The paper was soft at the corners. My 7-year-old handwriting leaned across the front. Across the middle, red and official, were the words "Return to sender." I opened it because Grandpa had told me to deliver what he couldn't. Dear Mom, I read, and my voice sounded steadier than my hands felt. Grandpa made pancakes shaped like stars. I can ride the porch steps without falling now. Please write back. Nobody moved. I took out another. Age 12. Honor roll. Crooked school picture. Returned. Another. Age 16. 3 sentences, and 1 word stamped across the front. Refused. Tessa made a sound so small it barely reached the table. My father set his coffee down too hard. Mail gets misrouted, Russell said. It was the voice he must have used on claims he did not want to pay. I reached into the satchel again and pulled out the certified receipts, green cards, dates, signature, his signature, Russell Whitcomb, year after year, written in the same tight hand. Grandpa mailed you copies, I said. You signed for them. My mother stood. That is enough. I looked at her then. Really looked. No, I said. That was the problem. You decided enough for me when I was 6. The screen door opened behind Mrs. Hargrove, and Graham Bellamy stepped into the kitchen carrying a folder. He did not look surprised by the room. "Mr. Whitcomb asked me to be present when the satchel was opened," he said. My father pointed at him. "This is private family business." Graham set the folder beside the envelopes. "No, sir. This is documented family business." Then he slid one sealed envelope toward Tessa. Her name was written across it in Grandpa's shaking final script. She opened it with both hands. I watched my sister read herself out of the story my parents had given her. Her face changed slowly, the way daylight changes a room before anyone admits morning has come. Inside was a copy of the 2000 notarized care agreement and Grandpa's letter. "If they told you Clara chose to leave," he had written, "ask them why a 6-year-old needed custody papers. If they told you she never reached out, ask them why every letter came back unopened." Tessa looked at our mother. "You told me she didn't want us." Marjorie reached for her. "You were a child. You don't understand what it was like." Tessa's voice was quiet. "I counsel children for a living, Mom. I understand exactly what this is." Then she unlocked her phone and read from an email she had found months earlier in an old backup. My mother's words, dated 2003, came into Grandpa's kitchen without mercy. "One child is all I can afford to raise properly. Clara is settled with Earl. Let it stay that way." The room went still in a way even grief had not managed. Graham opened his folder and placed the trust documents on the table. The farmhouse, the barn, and the land had been transferred on the 14th of August 2025. I was trustee. I was beneficiary. My parents had no authority here. Russell muttered something about illness, pressure, undue influence. Graham tapped the notarized physician statement from Dr. Naomi Feld. "Earl Whitcomb was dying," he said. He was not confused. My mother whispered, "We are still your parents." I looked at the returned letters spread between us, like years. "No," I said. "You were the address that kept sending me back." My parents came for a house. Grandpa had left them a delivery, and by the time it reached the right hands, there was nothing left for them to take. My father tried to speak after that, but the words came apart halfway through. Something about lawyers. Something about blood. Something about how grief made people dramatic. Graham Bellamy closed his folder and said any further contact about the property could go through his office. Dawn Ellery slipped her clipboard into her bag without making a sound. Mrs. Hargrove, still standing by the screen door with her casserole, looked at my mother and said, "Earl always did know where a thing belonged." Then she set the dish on the counter and left. My parents walked out of Grandpa's kitchen with the same stiff dignity they had brought in, only smaller now. Russell took his keys from the table like they weighed more than metal. Marjorie paused at the mudroom, waiting, I think, for Tessa to follow. Tessa did not move. She stood beside the table, one hand resting near the returned letters, her face pale and awake in a way I recognized. Some truths do not enter gently. They kick the door open and make you look at the furniture. After their car left, the house did not feel triumphant. It felt exhausted. Tessa asked if she should go too. I wanted to say yes, because wanting space is easier than admitting you are afraid of what might grow in it. Instead, I put water on for tea and took down the flour. "I'm making hand pies," I said. "You can stay in the kitchen if you don't talk too much." She nodded like I had offered her shelter. We worked badly together at first. She held the knife wrong. I corrected her before I could stop myself. That evening, she asked the question I had been waiting for and dreading. "Are you angry at me?" I wiped apple juice from the counter and told her the truth. "I don't know where to put you yet." She looked down at her hands. "Then don't put me anywhere," she said. "I'll stand where you can see me until you decide." That was not an apology big enough for 25 years. Nothing was. But it was the first answer in my life that did not come back stamped, refused. In the weeks after, my parents tried once. A letter from Russell arrived with 3 lines of regret and 2 paragraphs about a reasonable family arrangement. I did not answer. I filed it in Grandpa's study behind the returned envelopes. Marjorie and Russell eventually listed their Myrtle Beach condo. Tessa told me that quietly, over the phone, like news from another country. I did not celebrate. Losing a fantasy, even an ugly one, still leaves a shape in the room. The 4th of April 2026 came warm and clear. My first birthday in the house after Grandpa. I made coffee, watered his tomatoes, and did not check the mailbox until almost noon. When I opened it, there was one cream envelope inside. No red stamp. No forwarding mark. Just my name, written carefully. From Tessa. The card said, "I know I'm late, but I'm writing now." I stood at the end of the drive with the mailbox door open and cried for the girl who had waited there, and for the old man who made sure the truth arrived. My parents abandoned me at Grandpa's. They thought that meant I had nothing. Grandpa left me the house, the proof, and one final delivery. In the end, they were the ones left with nothing. Some families teach us love by giving it freely. Others teach us love by withholding it until we finally understand it was never ours to earn. What happened in Grandpa Earl's kitchen was not just about a house. It was not really about land, money, legal papers, or who got to keep an old farmhouse at the end of a gravel drive. Those things mattered, but they were only the surface. The deeper truth was this: being abandoned by people who should have protected you can make you spend years believing you were the problem. You start asking the wrong questions. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? How could I have been easier to love? But sometimes the answer is painful and freeing at the same time. You were not hard to love. They were unwilling to love you properly. Clara spent most of her life sending love to an address that kept returning it. And still, she grew. She worked. She cared for people at the end of their lives. She kept showing up for Grandpa Earl, not because it would win her parents back, but because love had taught her a better language in that house. Earl did not just leave her property, he left her proof. He left her dignity. He left her the truth at the exact moment she was strong enough to hold it. That is the lesson here. Family is not always the people who claim the title. Family is the person who keeps your portion warm, the person who remembers your birthday when everyone else forgets, the person who protects your name when you are not in the room, the person who teaches you that healing does not mean pretending nothing happened. And sometimes, resilience is not loud. Sometimes it is simply standing in your own kitchen, holding the truth in your hands, and deciding you will not be returned to sender anymore. If this story touched something in you, subscribe to the channel for more stories about family, betrayal, healing, and the strength it takes to finally choose yourself. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stop waiting for someone who should have come back?